Welcome to the Life Science and Marketing Podcast, where we discuss marketing and career insights and tips with leading experts from across the globe. Let's join our host, Paul Avery, CEO of BioStrata, as he chats with our next life science marketing guest.
Today, I am joined by Andrew Bertera, or Andy to his friends, who is the Executive Director of Marketing and Sales at New England BioLabs, where he's been for nearly 15 years. He's also Chairman-elect at SAMPS, which is the Sales and Marketing Professionals in Science group that we both love being involved with, although Andy obviously has to invest quite a lot more of his time in it than I do, so thanks to him for that. He is a deep life science marketing and commercial expert, having previously held roles at Promega and GE Healthcare and others to go with that long stint at New England BioLabs. Andy, it's amazing to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me today.
It's my absolute pleasure, Paul. Looking forward to talking to you.
Well, I am looking forward to it because I know that you've got a great track record and I would love to hear your story. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, happy to share. So, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from the New England area where I now live. I'm actually from Newport, a town in South Wales. So I'm a very proud Welshman. I was actually born and raised in Newport. At a young age, I'd always had a fascination for nature and animals in particular. In fact, I wanted to actually be a vet when I was in school and high school particularly. Spent some time working on farms and at local vets. But unfortunately, it's tougher to get into veterinary school than it is into medical school, at least it was then. So my grades weren't quite up to that, let's say. And the thought of going back and trying to push my A-levels from Bs to As and things like that was just too much. So I decided to continue on my path to go to college. Went to King's College in London and studied microbiology. So really enjoyed my time there in London, and at the end of that had the fortunate position of having two job offers on the table, one with Burroughs Wellcome and one with a company that I eventually joined called Amersham, as well as two PhD offers. Graduate school at the time anyway didn't exist in the UK, so it was project based. And I decided I couldn't really see myself being an academic. I really enjoyed the industrial aspects of research. So decided to take a leap of faith and joined a company called Amersham, as I mentioned, where I was working in R&D. Spent a number of years in R&D, producing or developing various products for different molecular biology applications. What I found out from that is I got the biggest kick out of actually commercializing those products or seeing those products be commercialized. Talking to customers, finding out how they use the products you developed, how they ignored the protocol you'd written, and things of that nature. And that led me into a path of looking at positions in marketing, particular product marketing. I actually moved from the molecular biology division into the drug discovery or cell biology business, as it was actually called then, and spent 7 years working as a product marketing manager at Amersham. To the degree I knew the job inside out, loved it, but it wasn't really challenging anymore. And at the time I was looking potentially to move to another company, and my boss at the time said, any chance you would be interested in a 2-year secondment to the US, or staying with Amersham, and managing the cell biology business from a marketing perspective in the US. My daughter had been born, about 6 months prior to that, so my wife was on maternity leave, so it was this perfect time, to go and live in Chicago as was. So we uprooted everything, family, and moved across to Chicago. I was there about a year, and then the life science division at Amersham merged with Pharmacia Biotech, and we had to leave Chicago to move to New Jersey under the sort of Amersham Pharmacia umbrella. And that sort of led me into a career of managing various different parts of the business. The 2-year secondment became 4 years, and then we sort of signed on the dotted line and became U.S. employees, let's say. Or I was a U.S. employee. My wife obviously got a job elsewhere. And at that time, I progressively managed many parts of the business, as I said, eventually the genomics and proteomics businesses for Amersham. And then we were acquired by GE, and I learned a lot at GE. I was there for about 2 years. Very fortunate to go to some wonderful training courses at Crotonville and other places like that. But GE really wasn't for me. It was a wonderful experience. They managed things by the numbers, not necessarily by the customers. And the life science division was just too small a part of this behemoth of GE. So I decided to take probably the biggest risk of my career and leave the same company, because Amersham and GE was all really one, and I'd been there for, 18 and a half years, something like that, and joined Promega. I moved with the family, we moved to Madison, Wisconsin. And Promega was a little bit going back to the early days of Amersham, much more customer focused, much more science focused. The vacancy I took on as head of marketing there had been a vacancy for, I believe, at least 2 years, maybe longer. So I had the opportunity to really come in and apply the knowledge I'd learnt and rebuild that marketing organization. I ended up being with Promega for a little over 4 years, and then NEB, New England BioLabs, approached me. They approached me actually a year before, and I wasn't interested at the time, but they came back and said, would you be interested in managing sales and marketing? And I found that intriguing, which we can come back to later, of that opportunity to manage both sides, if you like, of the business. And joined New England BioLabs, moved back to the East Coast, and I've been here now for 14 and a half years as Executive Director of Marketing and Sales, which means I work with our global operation on the marketing front, but also have responsibility for sales and now more recently customer service in the US. So it's been a progressive career of staying focused on science, enjoying that aspect and the connection to the customer, but progressing my commercial skills through marketing initially, marketing and sales, and now obviously management of both.
That's awesome. Oh, so many questions. Where should we begin? Let's start with moving into a marketing and sales role, because I've interacted with lots of people who head up a division that are responsible for that, often a commercial director of some sort. But a lot of them come from a business development background and not the marketing background. And of course, you come from the marketing background, not the sales background. So what was that like, and what did you learn moving into more of a combined role?
Yeah, I was very lucky. The first marketing position I really took on, I moved sites. So I moved from Amersham, its headquarters in Little Chalfont, Buckinghamshire, down to Cardiff in Wales. And I was the only marketing person on that entire site. So I actually still wore a lab coat. My office was basically off the lab, and literally customers or it could be salespeople or whatever rang up for questions. And I literally could open the door and shout, "What's the answer to this?" and get that answer and answer people very quickly. So it made me look perhaps better than I was at that time. But it was a real interesting opportunity because although I had obviously a marketing manager, most of my sort of early learning of marketing was very much on the job. So I almost think of it as applying my scientific background to marketing, thinking about data, thinking about, these sort of experiments you could actually carry out from a marketing perspective, and then applying them to this new world of marketing that I was in. So it was, it really was bottom up and on the job. And I believe very much today it's easier for a scientist to become a marketer than it is a marketer to become a scientist.
Yeah, I still think that's true. When I think about the sheer complexity of certain scientific topics, having a strong background in it really goes a long way. I think marketing and to a certain extent sales, I think we can understand as humans quite intuitively because we're marketed to constantly and sort of understand, I think, the surface aspects of advertising at the very least. Maybe when it gets a bit more strategic, it's a bit trickier to get your head around without sort of going on formal courses or having some formal training.
I would agree. I mean, I think that training is important, and particularly in today's more digital world, understanding how the technologies work, I think, is an important aspect of that. But really what you're providing is tools around your basic knowledge and experience, that you can actually apply and perhaps do things more efficiently or more effectively, and then obviously apply them to the job you're doing at the time.
Absolutely. I love the fact you mentioned technology there, because over the course of your career, I would imagine the technology that you've had access to as a marketer and then as a more commercial sales director as well has changed. So how do you think technology's influenced your role, the roles of your team over the years?
Great question, and obviously it's changed dramatically. I can remember, spending hours just typing up plans or putting together what we call acetates at the time, to actually put presentation together. It was all sort of, overhead projectors and changing from sort of one acetate to a next. And of course, most of it was handwritten on those acetates. So as a consequence, if you made an update, you had to start again. So,
Right.
starting at that basis, it's a huge change to today's very digital, email websites, and now sort of CRM and AI-driven world. I think the biggest change over that period is really the accessibility to data, particularly data around customers. We don't have, perhaps in the life sciences, the same level of data that some of the largest sort of B2C organizations have, which is good and bad, I think. But having that data allows you now to really start thinking about who it is you're marketing to. Thinking about not necessarily one-to-one marketing, because I think that's a challenge within the life sciences and marketing to scientists, because you don't really know them as individuals. You know more about the work they actually do. But certainly developing personas around types of individuals, groups of individuals, segments of the market, I think is now a great way to actually make sure your messages are more applicable to the audience you're marketing to.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because one of the other questions that came to mind while you were taking us through your path so far was you kept coming back to customer centricity and wanting to be closer to the customers and the science. So what is it about that that's appealing to you, and why do you think it's important for organizations to have that customer-centric viewpoint?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the definition of marketing has obviously changed hugely over the years, and certainly changed a lot more since I've been in marketing. The more classical definitions revolve around the 4 Ps, product, price, promotion, place, etc. And those sort of definitions are still important and can be the basics around thinking about what you do with a new product or existing product in terms of marketing. But I believe strongly today, marketing is very much around growing the business by developing best-in-class customer experiences. And I like that definition from 2 perspectives. One, growth. Marketing is a part of the business. I'm always astounded when particularly people in product marketing say they don't have a sales target. I mean, I've always had a sales target. I don't know whether that's just lucky for the companies I've worked with, but to me, that connects you with sales. It means you see probably the most important metric you're ever going to get as a marketer, the results of all your efforts, is customers buying things. The other aspect of that is through customer experience. And the reason I like that as part of the definition of marketing and why it's so important is it takes marketing away from being a department. Anybody who actually directly or indirectly impacts or touches a customer is marketing, whether it's the person, in shipping who's actually packaging that product and making sure it doesn't arrive, beaten up and in a bad way, or whether it's the customer service person taking an order if they're taking it on the telephone, or technical support, supporting a customer post-sale with a problem they might be having. All of those influence, the brand and the sort of philosophy or thinking that a customer has around that company, and all of that is marketing. So for me, customer experience, customer centricity is really one of the most important differentiators a company can have relative to its competition, and thus is important for marketing.
I think that's a really fascinating way of looking at it. To your point, we draw fictional lines in organizations because it helps us organize ourselves and keeps some of the management of things simpler. But in essence, we all exist within a company to deliver a quality solution to our customers, so they hopefully want more, tell their friends, and we, through our other activities, we grow our brand, we attract people to our website, we can turn those into leads, and hopefully they buy things. But I think it's such an interesting point that we sometimes forget that in the pursuit of simplifying roles and drawing lines.
Yeah.
So how do you, given the role you're in these days, how do you go about ensuring that the whole business, where appropriate, but certainly your teams, keep that customer experience front and center?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's lots of things that we do, some of which are more impactful than others. So some simple things I do. Every week, I have our CRM system generate randomly 5 cases of an interaction, either between customer service or tech support and a customer. And I just scan through them to see, A, what types of questions customers are asking, but also how we answer those questions. You know, simple sort of actions that we've taken around this, and some of these predate me, is we found when a customer had a problem with a product, 99 and probably more times out of 100, we just replace the product. So the simple change we made is, unless the order is a significant dollar value, the customer service rep can just action that themselves. They don't need to go through an approval route. They just do it because we already did it anyway, and it's actually the right sort of experience. The customer doesn't want to say here, oh, I got to get my manager's approval to actually replace that product. They can say, we understand you got a problem. We're sorry you experienced that. We'll send it out today. It'll arrive tomorrow. So it's a good experience. Customer is satisfied. Hopefully the problem is resolved and move on. So that's one way I do it. On the sales side, I also have a report each week that highlights any customer inquiries that are aging, if you like. So I look for anything that's more than a week old. And sometimes, and in fact, most of the time, it's usually the sales rep just hasn't moved that case from open to pending or hasn't closed it. But occasionally you catch one. We all get too many emails, and sometimes that email will have got lost. So simple, using, I guess, reports and tools to make sure that the customer experience is of the quality you want is one thing. The other one I would highlight, and I highly recommend this to every marketer, is get out there. Don't sit in your office. Go out and travel with the sales reps. There is nothing more humbling than spending, months developing a piece of marketing collateral, and then to see it being used by a salesperson or overseen by a customer, and realize the message doesn't come across quite the way you were actually planning. So interacting directly with the customers is even more important to achieve that. You can't obviously. I can't track every interaction and those sorts of things, but I think getting a flavor for those randomized ones or seeing yourself is critical.
Oh, I love that. There's so much gold in that. If you're listening to this, I hope you're jotting down notes for cool things you might implement in your own team there from Andy. Thanks for sharing those. I especially love the getting out and about, going on sales calls. You can join those digitally for in a lot of cases now, so there's not even any real cost or travel involved. And I was at the LRIG Drug Discovery Conference a couple of weeks ago, and one thing that struck me was I wished more marketing people were at it. Because seeing your materials being used on booth, hearing the conversations that customers have with your business development reps, seeing what other conversations are happening on other booths, right? Potentially your competitors or businesses that your business might acquire at some point. It seems to me that it's very rare that you can have so much opportunity to learn valuable information in a single place, a single time. And if you really go into those shows with a plan, you can capture so much insight.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, maybe we come on to the merits of trade shows as a separate topic, but that opportunity to interact with a large number of customers in a relatively short period of time is golden, as you highlight. We have a sales meeting actually coming up next week, and one of the salespeople actually came up with the idea of doing a role reversal where we set up small tabletops that the marketing person is going to man, and the salespeople take on the roles of customers to try and sort of see how the marketing person is learning the type of questions the salesperson getting every day, and the sort of salesperson is listening to the answers that the marketing person would give. And that's obviously role playing outside of the world of the customer, but doing that with customers and, being asked very often, the questions that you don't think will be asked, or sometimes they're not even complicated questions, and you're thinking, oh, I never thought anybody would ask that of me, is really, incredibly valuable. And as I said, humbling as well, because, all the effort you put in to develop a communication tactic, and you realize maybe it just doesn't resonate, or it's too complex, or whatever it might be. And sometimes you can't get that through surveys and sort of non-face-to-face interactions, because the survey is designed like one question, and it's the answer that then triggers you to ask another 3 questions that you wouldn't have thought to put in a survey.
By definition, that survey's a box, right? You've already
Yes,
created the game and the rules, and then you've got to play within it. Whereas I love the random stuff that can end up having conversations with on booth. Then there's the often drinks or networking events that happen at the end where the game, the size of the box is even larger, because who knows what you're going to hear customers say then. Oh, I've always really wanted to move into this research area, but the technology can't do it yet. And you're sat there thinking, oh, there's a division in my business that can actually help you do that. Like that technology already exists today.
Yeah.
Which I think is
totally agree.
I love the idea of your from your business development team there as well, because what a great way to foster empathy in the marketing team for what it's like to do that sales role. Because I think when we don't get out of the building enough as marketers, I think we sometimes forget what it's like to be at the sharp end with customers that our customer service people have and that our sales people have. And the more empathy we can have for the business development team, I think the better a job we can do as marketers, as opposed to when we sometimes feel at odds with the sales team, which of course can happen.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the overlap between sales and marketing, as I mentioned earlier, was one of the things that appealed to me joining New England BioLabs. And, we're fortunate here that we're private, so we don't have quite perhaps the same sort of quarterly earnings pressures that public companies has. But, at the end of the day, you've still got 2 groups of humans who, got slightly different, views on how to achieve the goals they're actually set. So for me, one of the things I really enjoyed was, having those 2 organizations report to myself and thinking about ways they can actually work more closely together. A lot of the challenges they face are identical. They just use different words or different analogies, if you like, to explain those differences. So getting them to work together in the field obviously is easier if they all report to myself. Because I can actually set those goals for the marketing people to be out in the field X times a year, et cetera, et cetera. But also bringing the salespeople in. We have a quarterly planning meeting where we review all the tactics and the sales numbers from the prior quarter. And, I should give credit to our sales manager because this was his idea. We actually rotate and bring one of the sales staff into those meetings every quarter just to see what it's like on the other side, if you like, and see, sometimes, you don't get appreciation for the amount of effort that goes into a campaign or a product launch or whatever it might be, and the complexities as to why we came up with what we did or how or why we priced a product or whatever the actual specifics are. And that is another way of actually connecting those 2 departments.
I love that because I can't help but think sometimes when we're marketers and for business development people as well, I'm sure it's similar. We've got a set of levers in front of us that we can pull to help drive the success we're looking for. But we've got different sets of levers and we sometimes forget that they're connected to the same machine. So going and seeing the thoughtful, smart way that marketing is setting up and pulling its levers, as opposed to feeling that maybe not that much thought went in, or is it random, or did somebody think, hey, this would be cool, let's do it. A lot of those decisions, as you say, they're very often data driven, they're customer insight driven, and good marketing teams are thinking a lot about what they do. They're not just doing, right? So let's talk trade shows. You mentioned trade shows briefly there. What are your thoughts on trade shows?
Yeah, it's an interesting one at the moment. Obviously, during the period of the pandemic, there were no trade shows, and I'm sure that's for everybody. That budget either didn't get spent or got reallocated elsewhere. Now, I think the first year post-pandemic, it was sort of 50-50 as to whether people were attending, whether they were too nervous to attend, whether they even wanted to attend. And certainly now the more recent trade shows are getting back to, full swing as they were pre-pandemic. So we're asking ourselves, is it basically going back to the way we used to work, or are there different things and learnings based on today's world that we should have? Certainly, trade shows are becoming not paperless, but less paper, so people, are less interested in taking away, brochures and things of that nature than they were previously. I think the customer interactions are still vital, and we definitely find that, if you can give a presentation, scientific presentation, as part of the conference, then that definitely, is a good way of actually driving traffic to your booth. but the booth then becomes a meeting place. And not that's not unimportant, but more than it is a sort of marketing tool, if you like. I'm not personally, for me, the jury is still out as to what the future of trade shows should be. If I'm honest, I was hoping that they would become less important going forward because they're just expensive, and the cost of travel alone is, makes them expensive. And it is hard to truly, quantify their return. As you know, and I think previous guests in the show have highlighted this, we do have this, natural attribution gap within the life sciences that, we can track these various interactions, whether it's on the website, whether it's email, even whether it's at trade shows, as the example you're using. But it's very rarely one single interaction that leads to a sale, particularly if it's related to a new product. And sometimes, the person who places the order isn't the person who uses the product. So you have all this great data around your interactions with perhaps the user, but sometimes connecting the actual sale to that user is not always straightforward, particularly in the large academic organizations, for example. So, I view trade shows as one part of the puzzle, and you have to, use that part of the puzzle carefully because they are expensive, but equally they are a way where you have lots of customers in one location. So there is value, but their true value to me is still a question I'm not sure I've answered to.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to answer the question. And I think my mind has always been what you described earlier, which is what are the different ways that we can extract value from being at this trade show? Obviously, if we can track clear leads that we didn't know before, that we generated at the event and they went on to buy something, then that's fab. But a key thing we do with a lot of our clients, for example, is for a lot of the biggish trade shows, the media are in attendance in force, both the sort of scientific peer review media, but also the trade media. And having them stop by your booth, look at your latest reagents, instruments, whatever it may be, doing a story on those, you can get a lot of media coverage off the back of being at an event by just setting up key media interviews on booth, and you're there anyway, right? But now you've just got a string of 6 months worth of high value media coverage for what is relatively low effort and low cost because you've done it all in one place. And so how can you stack the deck in your favor to get value out of the trade show outside of the things you can't measure?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, as you say, you're there anyway, so it's really multitasking and maximizing that return. And if you can plan customer interactions or business interactions up front, so you're having those business meetings around that because you're there, they're there, then you can obviously increase that value. And sometimes that moving the customer along the buying journey is as valuable at a trade show or a conference, let's say, not just the trade show part of it, as it is, starting with somebody who's at the top of the funnel.
Yeah. We're just looking to influence, aren't we, at those different stages, however we can. But I want to come back to marketing in a moment, but this is called life science and marketing for a reason. So let's come back to you just very briefly.
Sure.
What would you say is the biggest career tip that you would give someone else based on your learnings throughout your career?
Maybe I'll give an example of a project when I was actually working in R&D that sort of fascinated me and gave me, I suppose, a great appreciation for the importance of customer insights, which is sort of, fits with the theme we're talking about. We were talking earlier about customer centricity. So I was working on a project, an interesting project that was funded actually partly by the EU. It involved academic institutes, it involved industrial partners across both the UK and France. And the big goal of the project was to actually automate various processes in molecular biology. The particular one of the projects I was involved with was looking at how you could label nucleic acids, particularly DNA, and at that time it was all radio labeling. And one of the parts that I was working on is, at the time, radioactive nucleotides you would store in the freezer to keep them frozen as a way of keeping them stable. And because we had to automate them, you couldn't really keep them frozen, so didn't want to actually spend the time thawing them as well. So the project I was working was, can you actually stabilize specifically P32 DCTP such you could store it at room temperature? Anyway, cut a long story short, after lots of different experiments, we found a way to actually stabilize it by looking at the buffers that the nucleotides were stored in. The downside to the buffer that we had is over time a chemical reaction occurs such that the liquid went from colorless to this horrible sort of browny black color. So it didn't look very good. It looked like it was deteriorating, even though the quality of the product was fine. And somebody, I can't remember who, came up with a smart idea. Let's just add a dye to the liquid so that you basically, cover up the discoloration. And after some experiment, we found a dye that didn't interfere with the actual use of the nucleotide, and it was red. Anyway, the project to automate this particular labeling didn't go ahead, but we commercialized this stable nucleotide. And the fascinating thing was customers couldn't care less of the fact it was actually stable at room temperature. They actually liked the fact that they kept all their radioactivity in lead vials actually in the freezer, because it was away from everybody else, and they could have a dedicated freezer just for radioactive products. But suddenly now you'd actually created radioactivity that you could see, because when you added it to the vial, the experiment you're doing, you could see this red color. If you accidentally spilt it on the bench in the hood or whatever, then you could see, splashes of red. And the product took off and was a great success, but it had nothing to do with actually the scientific objective, which was to stabilize it. It was about the unforeseen benefit of actually making the radioactivity visible in this case, and you could actually follow it. And the insight really was, really thinking about how the customer actually used the product and the challenges they had, and the very simple thing that you can't see radioactivity, but now you could. So it actually reduced some of that sort of challenge that they actually had. And since then, I've been involved in a number of ethnographic studies, actually watching customers use your products and things like that. And it's absolutely fascinating to see, how different customers use products in different ways, and the sort of tips and tricks they've sort of been trained at as scientists that you don't always think about as a marketer. So, bit of a long story, but hopefully that is an interesting one that concludes the tip, I guess, to marketers is, never try and second guess, how customers are going to use your products. Go out, talk to them, carry out surveys, don't be afraid to ask dumb questions as well, because sometimes they're the ones that actually uncover insights that are not always obvious.
I love that. A friend of mine's a user experience researcher, and he always talks about the value of actually observing people use a product, because they will do things, whether that's software, like you're sort of watching them browse a website or an app, or whether it's a physical product like an instrument. Even just simple things when you show it to them the first time and they're trying to figure out how to switch it on, and you see where they instantly reach for where they think the on button should be, which is more often than not where you placed it. I think can be fascinating. And your story especially resonates with me, because I remember when I was in the lab doing my PhD, my preferred PCR reagents, I think it was thermoelectron before they were part of Thermo Fisher, or maybe they were root of Thermo Fisher, I don't know. But the reason we all used it in the lab is because it had the loading dye already in it. Mm-hmm. So when you got your results, your PCR had run, you needed to put it in a gel to run it. You didn't have to worry about adding any loading dye because it was already in. So it's just one less step that you had to worry about. We loved that.
Yeah. No, I tell you, sometimes the simplest sort of features are the ones that actually resonate the most. And I particularly like that particular type of product, because I think it gives a nice aspect that sometimes gets forgotten about in the life sciences, and that's life cycle management. We're very much focused on the latest and greatest, what's the new product and all the rest of it. But sometimes there's more revenue and more, share you can gain by really thinking about how you can reinvent existing products. And that's not always the product itself. Sometimes it could be the packaging. Sometimes it could be the protocols. Sometimes it could be, the application with other products. So lifecycle management is a great way to actually evolve and develop products based on customer insights.
Yeah, that's a topic we haven't really talked about much on the podcast so far, lifecycle management. So have you had much experience then reinvigorating products in some of the mechanisms you described?
Yeah, I mean, so many different types. I mean, a great example that predates me at New England BioLabs is restriction enzymes. So for the audience who might not be scientists, restriction enzymes are the scissors, if you like, of molecular biology. They cut DNA in very specific places. NEB was one of the first companies to actually commercialize restriction enzymes in its early days. Initially, they were purified from the organism in which they were originally identified. Over time, they become recombinant, which allows you to manufacture them more easily. But then the first sort of evolution of that was to actually add the buffer as part of the product. So initially you buy the enzyme, and then you would actually have to make the buffer up yourself. Adding the buffer, it's a convenience factor. Some people, thought that was a waste of time, prefer the scientists to make themselves, but you'd add a convenience factor to that. Over time then, the example you highlighted, there are many different restriction enzymes, all using different buffers. So we modified the restriction enzymes to use less buffers to the day where you have most of them now using a single buffer. That, again, simplifying the process, particularly if you're using multiple restriction enzymes at once. And then more recently, looking at things like temperature. Can they actually all work at the same temperature? And then even more recently, adding load-in buffers to the actual buffer itself, so that when you use the restriction enzyme, you can add it directly onto a gel to see what you've actually fragmented. So, this is obviously over many decades, but you keep adding to the actual product so that the product is actually fresh and new for the customer. But most importantly as well, particularly when products and most products, enzymes don't really become truly consumables, let's say, and commoditized. But to prevent the price eroding, you can add value by these sort of improvements, most of which are not technically big lifts, but they're convenience advantages to the customers that can hold your price.
I love that. So for listeners, if you work at a life science business that has a range of products where perhaps there's older products that these days maybe don't feel as exciting as the new things you're launching, what opportunity is there in really going back and looking at some of those products and thinking, do these meet current market needs? What incremental but powerful changes could we make to them that's going to offer value to customers, that's going to help us maintain or even capture further market share for those products? I think that's a great tip.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and some of them are simple. As I said, even packaging is a great way to enhance value to a product. We all hate those plastic manifolds that you cut your finger trying to open up whatever's inside. There's better ways to package things that can win you market share, even if the product itself inside the package doesn't change.
Absolutely. We had a company who we used to use their DNA extraction kits, and I guess there must have been RNA extraction kits. One of the boxes was bright blue and the other box was bright red, but that did make like brand recognition for those products. Yeah. You'd see all the empty boxes outside the labs that were like cracking through lots of molecular biology, and it's all these subconscious triggers that are like, oh, we've run out of DNA extraction kit. Well, I know which one I'm going to buy because it's the one I just saw that I know clearly who the brand is.
The company you're referring to, beginning with Q, has been very successful in that market, and that was a very simple way of differentiating those two products. But also in that case, because the products are stable at room temperature, they have great brand recognition on every molecular biology lab shelf in the world, probably.
Absolutely. So there's another one. Of course, it's going to be zingers. Lauren will convert this into a blog post. I think it's going to be on the long side, given the amount of tips and tricks in here so far. But one more is, when you mentioned restriction enzymes, you reminded me of a brief conversation we had at SAMPS in Glasgow this year about the NEB catalogue, and what a brilliant example of content marketing it was before content marketing was a thing, by having, and for those of you that aren't ex-scientists or that don't know much about NEB in the catalogue, as well as including all the products like the restriction enzymes, all the different proteins and the nucleotides and all the things that you can order from NEB, it also basically was part textbook explaining how that particular reagent works, the conditions under which it works well, what might cause it to work badly, and how to troubleshoot it. So it actually was a bit of a molecular biology Bible for optimizing your experiments in the days before lots of that information could be found on the web. And we'd literally have the NEB catalog in our lab, not just to help us with ordering, but to help us troubleshoot our experiments, which is just a genius way of making your catalog part of your product.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, New England BioLabs has been producing a catalog since 1975. The company was formed in 1974, so we have a 50th birthday next year. And the interesting thing is that first catalog didn't include that technical reference guide. I think it was the second one. But also interesting, that first catalog in 1975 was made of recycled paper. So another aspect of NEB is sustainability. So I'll just throw that one in as an interesting thing to think about. But you are totally correct that the catalog and its longevity has really been about that last third of the catalog, not necessarily the price list or the list of products, but really those technical reference guides. And even to this day, you go into many of our customers' labs and you'll see, older catalogs that they don't want to part with because they got post-it notes or folded over pages, where they're referencing things, on a whatever basis to use. And sometimes, if you're in the lab and you got gloves on, it's easier to handle a piece of paper than it is to sort of go on your phone and look something up, just from a practical perspective. That said, two things actually. We talked earlier about customer experience, and I think that catalog is definitely an experience that has allowed NEB to, in some ways punch above its weight a little bit, to have a bigger presence in those labs than perhaps its, monetary market share actually has. It's also allowed us to create and develop a brand that is very much around putting science first, because many of those technical reference guides are not directly related to the products we sell. They're more valuable in an indirect perspective. But that said, the world is turning digital, so we do see the number of catalogs we produce each year, and we still do produce it, are getting less. And customers are, looking for digital experiences alongside the catalog, the printed ones. But we still produce it. We still get, I'm not sure the recent stats, but it used to be about 1,000 requests for people just ringing up, send me one, and that's just in the US. And a lot of them are used as teaching aids today, to be honest with you. So they're used as textbooks, as you sort of highlighted.
Yeah, and ultimately the world changes. We talked about technology right at the start of this interview, and certainly my time in the lab, the internet was a thing, but probably wasn't useful like it is today. And of course, I was being taught by PIs and postdocs that were very much pre-internet. So for them, there was there's two books you need. You need Maniatis and you need the NEB catalog. And between those two, you can probably solve 80% of the problems that you're going to have. But today's PIs have perhaps grown up in the world of the internet. Today's postdocs the same. And the PhD students who will be those PIs and postdocs in not much time will be very digital first, I can imagine. And I guess that's just an indication of how you've got to keep evolving as technology evolves.
Yes, totally true. It's an interesting time. We've been ourselves trying to understand how scientists, particularly those that are doing lab work, will use mobile devices going forward. It's an interesting one, particularly in academia, because that mobile device is also your personal device. So it's this intrusion of where's the line between your home life and your work life, if you like, on that single device. And what we were finding, the experiments we were trying to do was to reduce the amount of paper we send out with a product, have a QR code actually on the product, so the customer could actually, scan that QR code, call up the actual protocol, and then read it on their mobile device. But the use of the QR codes was pretty much non-existent. And yet you go to our website and protocols are one of the most downloaded aspects of our website. So, we're trying to actually, correlate the two. And I think the simple thing was protocols are not easy to read on the phone, that you can't practically use them. And very often people like to actually print them out because it's something they actually have on their lab bench so they can sort of follow through or maybe check off the steps they're doing. So now we're thinking, how do you connect that mobile experience with the desktop experience? So I don't know, you scan the QR code, but it actually just sends a note directly to the printer to print off the protocol, or it sends an email link to your desktop that you can actually go directly to the protocol rather than searching on the website. So, and this is a very simple example, but I'm intrigued about how the life sciences, will evolve this sort of interface between mobile, desktop, digital, and physical, as technology moves forward.
That's a really good point. Another good example of what happens when you observe customers, right? I was in the lab 15 years ago, so I'm sure it's not like this now. But writing on protocols was the best way to capture the details that you needed that weren't in the protocol, either because you learned something about the protocol that you needed to add or modify in some way, or because there was kit or stuff that you wanted to remember what freezer it's in, or, oh, I have to go to Bob's lab to get that particular reagent because we don't actually have it in our lab. And you just make those notes on the printed version so that you end up with your version of the protocol in essence.
I remember those days. And then you used to sticky tape the protocol into your notebook, so, but, with obviously electronic lab notebooks, it's a little bit different these days. But
yeah, I'd be fascinated to go and see what a PhD student sat at the bench is doing now, and whether they've got a screen on all the time, and if they're using digital notebooks like we used handwritten ones.
Yeah, I think it's, I've seen both. I think it's in a state of flux, to be honest with you, with, a lot of it being guided by who the teacher is, the professor, the PI, or whatever that sort of leads that group, and influence in their direction, so.
Well, maybe one day we'll have I know it should be NEB, but we used to call NEB NEB in my lab. So we need we need a NEB bot, right? I need to be able to speak to a bot about, I want to use this restriction enzyme. What should I keep in mind? What can go wrong? And then the bot just talks to me out of some speaker in the fume hood.
Well, I mentioned earlier about my early days in marketing, and really thinking about marketing as a science and carrying out experiments, and we certainly have done that at here as well as other positions I had. One example that I was going to bring up relative to what you said is we still actually have it. We built a skill on the Alexa platform where you could actually ask Alexa, what's the cut site of restriction enzyme X or ECHO1, if you want to use an example. What buffer should I use of? If I'm doing a double digest, which buffer should I use? And it works. I mean, it has the same challenges that Alexa has in terms of doesn't always understand accents and things like that. But the skill actually works, but the adoption of it just wasn't there. Even though you do see sometimes Alexas in labs and things just play music, to be honest with you. But just I think that's the beauty of today's digital world, is it's relatively inexpensive to experiment with things like that. And I would say, what's the worst going to happen? Somebody thinks you're innovative. The technology may not take off, but the end result, that was cool. Even if they don't use it. I mean, we've been playing with QR codes, and I go back to the catalog, and the QR code can basically bring the page to life. It could be, open up a video, or a lot of maybe all of NEB's catalogs have a nature image on the front, so you can actually hover over that image. At the moment, it's a polar bear, and it tells a story of the polar bear, and global warming and things like that. So just another way to interact with customers and trying to bridge that digital to print, in this case, into context.
There you go. If you're listening and you're close to a lab, you need to run to your lab now, get the latest edition of the catalog, and see if you can get the live cover to play for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I had this conversation yesterday with a company. Even when you've got an amazing idea, technological innovation, easier, faster, better way of doing something, sometimes your biggest competition is still inertia, right? Like people don't want to change. They do it the way they do it because they've always done it that way. Even if your way is like 10 times easier and better, sometimes it's just still hard to get people to adopt it.
It is, yeah, and that's both internally and with customers, to be honest with you. I think internally, maybe go back a stage. One of my prior managers had the expression "steal with pride," and what he actually meant by that was, life sciences is a relatively small industry, but never be afraid to, take marketing ideas, commercial ideas from other industries and try and invent them for life sciences. I mean, I've heard you say this a number of times, scientists are humans and they're influenced in the same way every human is. So if there is a successful tactic in another industry, although you might need to tweak it, never be afraid to sort of take it and try it. Just because it was in, fast consumer good industry or something like that doesn't mean it can't work for life sciences. It just needs to be tailored to that particular audience,
I think you're so right. There's so many times in my own lab experience, but also when I moved into the commercial world and I was at trade shows, where a sexy looking instrument trumped a boring looking instrument every day of the week. And it's that little bit extra money and that little bit extra thought, but to really create something iconic that sits in people's labs, they will be proud of that. People from other labs will come to see it. I know that sounds bizarre, but they will. And I think those things are worth investing in.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, you look at a lot of the next generation sequencers these days, and they have a different colored blue. Sometimes they're blue, sometimes they're green, light that sort of pulses back and forth. I mean, does that have to be there? No. I mean, does it look cool? Damn right it does. And it begs a question. People come, what is that? It's, I think it's just a way of upselling the technology, with some very simple, aspects to it.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Right. I want to respect your time, Andy, because I could speak to you for hours. In fact, I've tried to bend your ear for hours at the different events we've been at, so it probably shouldn't surprise you. If people want to follow up with you personally, what's the best way for them to get hold of you? Is it LinkedIn or email?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the easiest. I'm happy for people to email me as well, but I get a lot of emails, so LinkedIn is probably the best way, and that differentiates it from the work traffic, let's say. So reach out you can find me on LinkedIn. There are not too many Berteras in the world, so you should be able to find me fairly quickly. And I can't remember on LinkedIn, with Andrew and Andy, to be honest with you, but look under New England BioLabs and you'll find me.
Good stuff. And maybe we should place a little strategic plug for the upcoming SAMPS event in the US in December, because I'm sure there'll be some people listening that might be interested. Could you give us the 1 minute on what's going on?
Will do. So maybe just if people don't know what SAMPS is, I think in your introduction you said it stands for Sales and Marketing Professionals in Science. It's an all-volunteer organization that puts on networking and webinar events with really the aim of saying there are not a lot of activities or events within the life science sales and marketing world that are put on by sales and marketing people in the life sciences. So it's opportunities to connect with people who are doing the same jobs with you. This year, we're back to normal, having done a conference in Europe in Glasgow earlier in the year, where Paul and I were both at. And we have an event in Boston, which is our US conference. It's, I should know the date, December 6th, if I remember the date correctly. I apologize if not, but it's the first week in December. And if you look up SAMPS, SAMPS.org, you'll find the details on the website there, but it should be a fun event. It's focusing around the practical uses of AI today as well as tomorrow, and you'll have great speakers like Paul.
The other speakers that are great, but I'll certainly do my best. And I think the buzz at the Glasgow event, I thought it would be cool because I think it's a cool topic, but the buzz at the Glasgow event was significant. So I think this event in the US is going to probably be even more exciting. Plus it's the other aspects. I'm not sure if it's on the agenda, but the Ask the Customer Anything sessions are absolute gold.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, we've done that at many meetings. I had the pleasure of hosting that event in Glasgow. And what we do, we bring, depending on the thing, 3 or 4 customers from various sort of areas of science. And literally the audience can ask them anything. They've been primed that they can talk about specific products, they can talk about pricing, they can talk about funding, they can talk about marketing tactics, they can talk about, why they use one social media channel versus another. And if it's like Glasgow, you find one of the individuals likes operating one way and the next person next to them operates in a totally independent way. But it's real valuable take-homes. And if you want I see a summary of that. There's actually, I think, a blog on the SAMPS site where you can read about that event. SAMPS, I should say as well, is free to join, so you don't actually have to pay to gain access to that content or listen to the webinars or read the blogs. There is a relatively small fee for attending the conference, which we're a non-for-profit, so it's not to sort of make any money. It's really just to cover the cost of the venue and the food and that stuff.
Absolutely. So, Andy and the team do an amazing job over at SAMPS. If you haven't checked it out yet, you should, because there's a lot of great content there already. And as Andy alluded to, the events are fairly unique in the life sciences, I think, at this point, which is brilliant. Andy, look, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Paul. I really enjoyed it. It's always great to be able to talk about marketing and marketing in the life sciences. So hopefully people find the content of value.
I'm sure they will. And I'll look forward to catching up with you soon. Cheers.
Then bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Life Science and Marketing Podcast. For your regular dose of cutting-edge life science marketing insights, don't forget to subscribe. Join us again in 2 weeks for another engaging expert discussion.